Okay, so now we're going to be going into a series of pages that will talk about this idea of protecting the brain. Okay, and on your notes packets, it asks you about which structures and fluids help protect the brain. There's going to be three main ones. So meninges, these are a layer of tissues that surround and protect the brain. Cerebrospinal fluid, so this is also something that is going to help protect the brain. And then lastly, the bones of the cranial cavity. So, and we think of these as the skull bones. Okay, so these are all three things that help protect the brain. The brain is the main integrating center of the nervous system, incredibly important. And so we're going to discuss each one of these three in detail. So the first one we're going to discuss are going to be the meninges, okay? And the specific meninges that surround the brain are going to be called the cranial meninges. So let me move to a PowerPoint that may help you with this, okay? So what we can see here from what we're looking at is that we've got a head cut in half with a sagittal section, so that's going to be a section right down like that, okay? And we're looking at my brain as if we're coming in this way, okay? All right, so right here you should notice in white with the little holes in it, that is going to be the cranial cavity bones, okay? So the bones that make up that the outer edges of that cranial cavity. Of course, here's the brain tissue, and then what you may notice are these little lines here, and this is going to represent meninges and cerebrospinal fluid. So we're going to talk first about the meninges, okay? Meninges are just going to be three layers of tissue that surround and help protect the brain. What we're looking at here is going to be a close-up of this little section that's in the box, okay? So to orient you, here is the bone, and down here is the brain, and so from here up to here are those cranial meninges, okay? So let's look at the different layers. So the first layer that's closest to the bone is called the dura mater, okay? And it turns out the dura mater has three layers to it. The most superficial layer of the dura mater is called periosteal. Remember, if you see this root ost, we're talking about bone. And so this is the one that's closest to the bone, okay? In the middle, we have this thing called a dural sinus, and this dural sinus is going to be filled with venous blood. It's filled with deoxygenated blood, or blood that does not have oxygen. And then the next layer right here is called the meningeal layer of the dura mater. Okay, so these are the three layers right there. And one thing, if you're following along on your notes packets, okay, so dura mater, the location of the layer, well, this is going to be superficial, or you could say closest to bone, okay? So one characteristic you should know about this is it's made up of dense connective tissue. Okay, and so this is a very tough layer. It's going to be very resistant to being torn and those sorts of things. And then you should know, and I'm not going to write them out because we just discussed them, but you should know the three, I'll call them sublayers, or three different parts of the dura mater, which is the periosteal layer, the dural sinus, and the meningeal layer. Okay. Now, the other thing we're going to have here is we're going to have, you have this word subdural. Now remember, sub means underneath or deep to. So we have this space called the subdural space. Okay. And here we can see it, okay, right here. Now in reality, there's not going to, in a normal circumstance, there may not be too much in the way of fluid and that sort of stuff there, but we do have this subdural space. Okay, so it's just a space underneath the bottom of the dura mater. Okay. Now the next meningeal layer we run into is going to be the arachnoid matter. Now, if any of you have seen that movie from, I believe, the 80s or early 90s called Arachnophobia, you may know that arachnoid means spider. And so if you look at these little spider web looking things here, okay, these are trabeculae that extend off the arachnoid matter, and it almost looks like a spider web there. Okay. Now, within these little web-like structures is another space. But this space actually is going to be one that's filled with a fluid. And the fluid that it's filled with is going to be cerebrospinal fluid. And that's really important. You should know that cerebrospinal fluid flows in the subarachnoid space that's deep to the arachnoid matter. Okay. And then the last layer of the meninges that's closest to the brain tissue, and it's shown here in this kind of yellowish line, is the pia mater. Okay. And this is very thin, very delicate tissue, and it hugs the brain. Every bump, every groove, every gyrus, every sulcus, it hugs the brain. So if we're going back over here to our notes, okay, the arachnoid mater is found in the middle, the pia mater is found deep, and you could also say closest to the brain. Okay. Keep in mind the arachnoid matter has those trabeculae that look like the spider webs that extend down through the space. And the pia mater, it's made of very delicate elastic and collagen fibers. Subdural space, sub, meaning going deep, like a submarine. So this is deep to the dura mater. Okay, and the subarachnoid space, deep to the arachnoid mater. Alright, and the big thing to know here for the subarachnoid space is that it contains cerebrospinal fluid. And that is the big deal with that space. Okay. And we're often going to see cerebrospinal fluid abbreviated CSF, so you should know that abbreviation. Now, a couple of other things that I would like to point out and is that there are these things called dural folds. Okay. And that's where the dura mater actually goes down deep into the cranial cavity. Okay. And so this is the image in your book that really shows you this. So it's on page 466. Okay. And so here we have the falx cerebri, we have the tentorium cerebelli, and then the falx cerebelli. Okay. And so these are folds that go deep. So let me show you on the brain model where these different dural folds would be located. Okay, so this is showing us our brain model again. Okay, and so again, as a reminder, this is going to be the cerebellum here. And you may notice this big fissure right here that separates the right half or the right hemisphere from the left hemisphere. Okay, so the falx cerebri is going to be the dural fold that will go deep down in there, all the way along that fissure and separate right half from left half. Okay. Now, on the back side, going deep here, we have this area between cerebellum and cerebrum. And so going deep right in here, okay, is going to be the tentorium cerebelli that separates cerebrum from cerebellum. And then the last one we have is actually going to be separating the halves of the cerebellum, okay, And so we have the cerebellum in two different halves. And so the falx cerebelli is going to be separating those two halves of the cerebellum.